When we have a high empathy environment where it is optimized, what we observe is less friction in our conversations.
Human intelligence and empathy will fall by the wayside, or maybe will it become more important than ever?
They had a chance to assess the helpful model before other aspects had been added to it. It was 30% more likely to cause harm and to lie or be disingenuous.
Tell me how empathy fits into the world of AI.
Where in your organization can you leverage this as a tool to help you run experiments? The purpose of AI is to help humans human better.
Okay, today we're talking about the idea of empathy as a core part of an organization's communication infrastructure, and how cultivating and measuring empathy can be the missing piece of the puzzle when building innovative, high-performing teams in the age of AI. My guest today is Andrea Goulet, a communication systems architect who is on a mission to translate the complexities of human dynamics into practical tools and frameworks so smart people can collaborate more effectively. Andrea has over 25 years of professional experience that includes building a $4 million software consultancy from the ground up, teaching over 100,000 students, and growing a massive global audience as an in-demand keynote speaker. Andrea, thanks for being here with me today.
You are so welcome. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I am really excited for this conversation because you and I, we met at the Agile 2025 conference. You filled my brain with so many thoughts around empathy, and I'm really excited to get into it. To start us off, I wanted to just follow my tradition and just get one big burning question out of the way. It's that uncomfortable but maybe pressing question that everyone wants to know the answer to, in my opinion. And then I'd like to zoom out and maybe just talk about three things. Like, first, I wanted to talk about what empathy actually is a measure of and what it indicates about a team or an organization. And then I thought maybe we can get into a few examples of how empathy can be used to create and reinforce a culture of adaptability, to facilitate knowledge transfer, and ultimately change the way a business measures performance. And then lastly, I'd like to maybe just talk about the role of empathy in the age of AI and whether human intelligence and empathy will fall by the wayside, or maybe will it become more important than ever? How does that sound to you?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So as I was mentioning up top, you gave a keynote speech at Agile 2025 in Denver a few months back. The title of your talk was Empathy as Infrastructure. And I had the distinct pleasure of missing it completely, but you gave me the Coles Note version over breakfast. Could you just tell us what you mean when you say empathy as infrastructure? Why is it maybe more than just a sort of woke snake oil buzzword?
To answer your question, I'm going to give a little bit of context into kind of how I got into this topic. I started my career in sales and strategic communications, where essentially part of the training is how to understand people. There's consumer psychology. You get a pretty technical understanding of essentially what empathy is, like how to predict another person's perspective and how to respond. So my business partner, who I built the software company with, he and I went to high school together. We grew the company together. A few years later, we get married, which is fun. And so what that ended up doing was create a really deep motivation to understand each other in a way that kind of you don't typically get. There were many, many times where we had the very traditional sales/engineering dynamic, and I felt like I wanted to rage quit. There was an extra incentive. And so just like he had told me, no, you're actually good with people. Why are you calling yourself non-technical? You can understand this stuff. You pick up on, you might not know it now and you might not have a computer science degree, but you are absolutely learning it. And I noticed that he had one on the opposite side, which was, I'm good with machines, but I'm not good with people. And that was something that he had been told. And honestly, a lot of the reasons that I wanted to rage quit were miscommunications. And I was expecting him to respond in a certain way. He didn't respond in a way that I had seen in the general population. And it was frustrating to me. And at the time, I had taken on this, identity of I'm non-technical. I'm good with people. I'm an empath. But what I was really doing was hubris. Because I had the false belief that I could walk into a room and I knew what people thought better than they did. And it's only been after decade or so of diving deep into the research that I've had that realization. And now I'm I just want to go back to my past self and apologize profusely. But I think a lot of people, I think this is a dynamic that is very, very, very common, right? We have people who identify as people, and it's like, oh, I'm an empath, right? I understand what people are doing. But then what I wasn't doing when I would, misunderstand Scott was like I didn't take the time to listen to his perspective. I was very judgy. I was like, why can't you blah blah blah, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a horrible way to treat somebody. An example would be I would say, here's my big idea, here's my big strategy, blah, blah, blah. And, halfway through, he would interrupt and he would pick one specific thing. He's like, that's not gonna work. And he was like, I know, I've been called like a professional balloon popper my whole life. And what we realized, like, and that's just so there's real frustration there. And it's like, why can't you see? Like, I'm excited not to interrupt me and stuff. But when we dug into it, because we had that level of compassion, like we truly cared about each other in a way where we didn't, like, we wanted to stick it out and we
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to make each other's lives more miserable. So that was the extra incentive to really figure it out. And so he told me, he's like, I have a lot of compassion for what you're building, and I don't want you to go down a direction that I know is going to hurt. And so it was like, well, okay, when you do that, it takes me out of like this flow and then I can't remember. And so this is the great thing is that when you can have empathic conversations like this, right, instead of just these friction points where people pull away, especially when you have different perspectives, this is where innovation comes from. So the innovative thing that we developed a lot of communication frameworks. And some of them, honestly, we ported over from couples counseling and just directly implemented them into the business.
Amazing.
Um, and it was amazing. But the framework that came out of this specific interaction was, essentially like, Scott, when you have a detail that you want to tell me about, do a find and replace and say, may I pause for a clarification?
Before you pop the
Because that
balloon.
gives me that gives me a little sense. And then if I'm on a roll, I'm like, no, hold on,
Mhm,
right? Like,
mhm,
let me
mhm.
finish my thought. So then I'm like, okay, what's up? He goes, and then I said, the next step is, what kind of feedback would you like? Macro feedback, micro feedback, or no feedback? Sometimes it's like, I just want you to listen to the big picture and like hear the whole thing and think, is this the right strategic direction to start putting some resources towards the details, towards
Mm.
doing more research or towards more implementation. But there are absolutely times where I'm like, okay, this is close to ready to ship. I want you to use your genius, like tear it apart.
Mhm.
And those teeny tiny things that we co-created together changed the way we work together because then it made it frictionless, even though we had completely different perspectives. And Scott Page has some really great work on this. He has a book called The Diversity Bonus. And for those of you who are just like, well, that's woke, this is based in math. When people who have really different perspectives can find ways to influence each other and work together to create something, you literally get in an organizational sense, 1 plus 1 equals 3. Like, that was our experience, and so to me, having the background of empathy, having the, background of working in software and seeing and learning about how complex software systems work, and it's like, "Whoa, this is the same as social systems." Like, there's math behind this. There's infrastructure, there's architecture here, there are principles that we can lean on. Then I got really excited, and so
Hmm.
my purpose was to basically help Scott understand what empathy was in a way that made sense to him. Because when I would try to describe why this was important or how to do things, he was like, yeah, you're just telling me to like have empathy. So, in the effort to try to explain things to him where it made sense, that ended up being kind of, blogging about it in public and just saying, here's what I'm finding and thinking. And it really resonated. So, that's where it's like all these different things come from. And it's transformed the way we work together, the way we live together, the way we parent together. We did sell our business last year, so there's a little bit of a different dynamic now. So the reason
Congratulations.
it's not just woke BS
Mhm.
is 2 reasons. The biggest overlying reason is that there is a difference between culturally understood empathy and computationally understood empathy. And so, me describing myself as an empath, right? And saying, oh, I know what it means, or like thinking that it's only being kind all the time and never setting boundaries, or thinking that it is, letting people walk all over you, or think like all these, or thinking that it's like, oh, I'm this psychic superhero, right? Like there are a lot of different kind of cultural signals, and identity things that play into this, which I think is what people are responding to. My goal is to really understand the computational side and the analytical side and the like neurological side and just what does the science say around what this is, and how can we just really understand it as a mechanism, as infrastructure, so that we can architect and design organizational systems. So the last point in terms of like what is empathy, going all the way, like if we're abstracting all the way up, right, to what it is, empathy is the evolutionary mechanism, and there are a lot of different systems in our brains and our bodies that contribute in a dynamic way to what gets expressed as empathy. But the reason that we have this is that we are a hypersocial species. And so empathy enables us to communicate, collaborate, and solve complex problems more effectively for species survival. When we look at it from that perspective, it's like, why would we work against our nature? And when we understand that, kind of what's at play, then we notice that there's a lot of different kind of levers we can pull. We can change our environment. We can change our own perspectives. We can change the way we communicate. Like there's a lot of different things that we can do to optimize empathy. So I think of empathy much more in a systemic way than in, there's definitely interpersonal dynamics, but not in I am an empath, because that's like saying I am a circulatory system.
Okay, yes, that actually, I'm really glad you took it there because, like, that resonates with me, right? We are a social species, and evolutionarily, we have the survival skill called empathy, which is about predicting somebody else's perspective. It's not about reading minds. It's not about knowing people's thoughts better than they know their own thoughts. It's not about not communicating. Right? Where we kind of think, oh,
Right.
yeah, you're empathetic. You understand. You don't even have to say the thing because you know the thing. So we
Mhm.
don't communicate. It's actually the opposite. It's not making assumptions about how people are feeling or what they're thinking and their POV. It's developing the infrastructural language to communicate around that because it's like core to our being as humans,
Mhm.
and how we've evolved. And I think like when you said I'd love to trace it back to figure out where this word went wrong. I'm paraphrasing, but that's how I
Yeah.
interpreted. I'm like, that is fascinating because I language fascinates me, and that specifically is one of those words that I think is imbued with so much meaning that was never really intended, and we've used it in certain ways. And you and I, we've talked about like the
Yeah.
superhero empath and like how that character is, what character traits and like what superhero skill that would be. It's mind reading. It's like, well, feeling
Yeah.
reading or what, but it's not. That's not actually what
Yeah.
empathy is or was. It's just the social fabric that helps us collaborate. When you put it like that, like I can't argue with that. I'm that person that you said, right? Like came to your keynote speech to be like a naysayer, to shoot you down, to tell you you're wrong. But actually, when you break it down that way, that makes tons of sense. And that's what teams need to do. Like, that's something we've been saying all along. But
Yeah.
for whatever reason, the word empathy gets kind of like painted with a certain brush. Whereas what we mean is let's have some kind of, computational empathy. Let's have the infrastructure. Let's have the sort of framework to communicate effectively, knowing that we don't all think the same things and see things the same way.
And that's a good thing.
Well, I mean, when you at the top
Because
you
if
said
we
Scott.
do,
Scott likes
yeah.
to fix bugs and refactor code. He is not among the general population.
No, he's not.
That is a different
And
a different human.
what ended up like the way that we built our culture, my number one thing was like, okay, I've seen empathy work in all these other industries. We're building our entire culture around empathy. And people literally, this is like 2009, 2010. Like we had consultants and they literally said, you can't do that. If you say the words empathy and software in the same sentence, you'll be laughed out of the industry. I'm the type of person I'm like, oh, hold my tea.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
actually where I'm going to double.
Yes. Challenge
So,
accepted.
but what we ended up doing was by learning about Scott's frustration and just, continuously feeling like, he kept describing that he kind of felt like I'm probably dating myself, but Milton from Office Space, where he's like sent into the basement and it's
Mhm,
like he's got his little stapler and
mhm.
like no one sees his value. I think there are a lot of people in organizations who contribute a lot of value, but it's not always visible. And so they get overlooked. So Scott was sharing kind of how he felt. We walked by, like, we were in a Barnes and Noble and they had a table for books and it was like, Maker Fest, make, make, make. And he was like, where's my table?
Hmm.
And, like, it's that kind of thing
Mhm.
that generated all the different chemicals and biological things where I all of a sudden understood. So now we'll get into the 4 different pieces of empathy, and I'll
Yeah.
share how this, experience demonstrates it. So before it was kind of like, "Oh, okay, I have an analogy. I kind of on an abstract level understand what you're talking about." But when I, who identify as a maker, was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so amazing to see, like, something that's just for me." Like,
Mhm.
I want to dive in and buy all of those books. I wanna go to all of the hackathons, and then hearing in Scott's voice just the frustration and the feeling like he couldn't find a place to belong. And, like, I had a place to belong, and he was, like, excited for that, but just, like, he had been really struggling to find other people who had the same passion as him,
Mhm.
and not only did he struggle numbers-wise, he also struggled because people like me were saying, "Well, why would anybody do that?" But in that moment, so there's 4 different aspects of empathy that kind of go into an empathy system. Jean Dicity is a cognitive neuroscience out of the University of Chicago. I really, really like his model, which is the functional architecture of human empathy. And when I was reading his papers, this was where I was like, "Oh, there's something really clicked," because, like, I do this in some of my keynotes. If you read his papers and take out the word empathy, you
Hmm.
can replace it with software.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's things like blank needs to be broken down from a monolith into more discrete concepts. And it's like that's a fundamental principle for, like, creating a healthy, like, system architecture. And so it was like, this is interesting." But back to the pieces about empathy, you've got compassion,
Mhm.
which is sensing suffering and wanting to do something about it. Self-compassion is doing that to yourself.
Mhm.
Super important. Kristen Neff has a bunch of great work on self-compassion, but also somebody else. So I care about Scott, right? We're doing this. When I sensed his suffering, compassion kicked in. And when compassion kicked in, that's when a lot of other things happened too. The other one that was, like, really surprising for me, but once I heard it, it made a ton of sense, is regulation.
Right, yes.
So being able to, like, identify our own bodily state, emotions, and intentionally shift them. Which is why, like, if I wanna rage quit, I can't listen to somebody else's perspective because I'm self-centered at that moment, and not because I'm an egotistical maniac, but because I'm human. When we've got really heightened emotions, just we can't listen.
And
So, regulation. So, in that moment, I was regulated, like, we were hanging out at Barnes& and Noble, I wasn't, like, super angry, I was in a joyful state, but able to shift that. The next is affect, which is emotion sharing. This is what we tend to think of as empathy alone. Necessary, not sufficient. So, being able to attune to somebody, like, "Okay, I sense you're frustrated. I have been frustrated. I know what frustration feels like." And it doesn't have to be forever. It's like a pang of, like, "Okay, you're feeling this." And it doesn't even have to, you don't even have to name it. Scientists essentially now plot emotions on a grid where you've got, like, it impacts you positively or negatively, like the sensation, and its intensity. So it's either calm or, like, really intense, right? So something like joy is, like, a really intense emotion, and we would label it as positive.
Mhm.
I just need to, like, plot that somewhere, abstract, and feel it. And a lot of times it's like this is reflex kind of thing.
Mhm.
Not for everybody. Some people have to, like, put a lot of intention to it, and that's okay. The last one is cognitive empathy, and this one gets talked a lot about in product design and user experience and things like that. But what this is being able to apply rational thinking and reasoning so that we can understand another person's perspective and predict how we should respond. And this one is critical because if we only rely on the other ones, then we don't take in the information, we're not able to influence. And also, we're not able to consider the costs and benefits. So, a big one is when compassion and affect are really, like, heightened, we can get so drawn into one person's perspective that we can't see the impact of a group. And so, an example here of why this is important is, like, doctors, if they're in an emergency room, there's been a horrible, horrible accident, they have to triage. If they spend all of their time in one room for an hour, then more people are going to suffer. And there are plenty of examples like this. So that's just one example. This is called compassion fade. So if you want to geek out about the actual literature. And this is the thing, it's like there are very well-researched terms to describe these things. And so when we look at those kind of 4 different aspects, that's how we can break down, oh, Scott was sad, but then the innovation happens when we have different perspectives. How do we fix it? How do we build that table? And so that's what we ended up doing was we went back to like how like there were lots and lots of conversations and a lot of them revolved around identity. And we were modeling things out about how we did our business. I mean, it was a lot of deep dives, which was fun because we're learning about each other. It helped us do our business better because I'm learning more about legacy code, less from a just like a book and like why truly like these are important. And what we ended up coming up with is kind of a counter where you've got makers. Yay! If you're a maker, celebrate. Scott's a mender.
Okay.
So it's like they're complementary because sometimes, like, if you're operating in white space and you need to do something really quick, like, you want rapid prototypers. If you are working on a mission or safety critical system and you need to change out, like, replatform it because the hardware is now out of date, you want somebody who is, like, super diligent and
Mhm.
isn't gonna just, like, rush through the job. Like, what Scott was saying is, like, the second type of project is the one where he's like, "Give me it, it's like candy." And so when you can operate with empathy, when you can interact with different perspectives, when you can appreciate the strengths that people bring, and that's what enabled us to build the company too.
I love that. I wonder, could we transpose that onto, another business? Because
Mhm.
I love these four things, right? Like I love to be
Yep.
able to take that. The last one I think is super interesting to me, the sort of the cognitive empathy. Obviously affect, we're talking about the sort of popular understanding of what empathy is, plotting something on, the magic quadrant of emotional intensity and then using that to guide your conversation. We have the compassion bit, including self-compassion, the regulation bit. I want to tie all these things together because I'm glad you brought in community. I'm glad you brought in the sort of like evolutionary social behavior, and then this the framework of these four elements of empathy. How does a business then take that and benefit from it? How do they know if it's working? Because it seems like there's a lot of conversation, like deep dives, like this is groundwork. A lot of organizations in growth mode are just like go 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 fast fast fast, produce
Yeah.
produce produce.
Yeah, which
How
is
can they
great.
use
And
this?
if you have more empathy, then you can grow, 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 and produce, produce,
Tell me
produce
more about
better.
this. Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, empathy is the engine, communication is the car.
Mhm.
Okay? If you have just a shell of a car with no engine, you're not going anywhere. I mean, I guess you can push it, you can get a tow truck or something,
It's
but
just like
it's like
Fred
you're
Flintstone it.
not gonna go very fast. If you have a high performance engine, you can go really fast.
Hmm.
So that's the way you think about it, right? An engine that's just sitting there in a yard, like, that's not gonna help you get where you wanna go either. So you need both of these things. So communication is the external expression of empathy.
Hmm. Mhm.
And when we have a high empathy environment where it is optimized, what we observe is less friction in our conversations. Because it's a predictive measure, I can predict with a relatively high accuracy and I understand the message that I'm trying to say. And the first time that I send it in a high enough fidelity way that you understand what I'm talking about. So think about this as the three-way handshake that operates the internet. So the three-way handshake on the internet, this is the HTTP protocol. The S, we bring in security. I'm the server. I want to send information, right? I'm like, hey, here are my packets. This is what I want. And I want to send them in this order. Galen, you're the computer, right? And you're like, oh, yeah, okay, I got these packets and I got them in this order. And then you send that back to me. I'm like, yep, those are the packets that I sent and they're in that order. We're good. That takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of resources, but it's accurate. So this is like active listening. A lot of
Hmm.
times you need that back and forth, especially like if you don't have a lot of overlap in terms of your perspectives or if emotions are heightened, right? When there's added complexity or uncertainty in the system, you need to slow down and like double check this accuracy. But there is not like this doesn't apply to every situation. So there's another type of internet protocol called UDP,
Mhm.
which is for streaming. So, like, UDP is what you're using to like, we're not checking with every person who's listening to this and verifying that the packets of our audio and video are coming in. We're just going, "Here's our content." Andrea is just spewing conversations, right? And we're trusting that it will get where it needs to go. But we don't need to spend the resources on it. So, in a human world, this is playing charades.
Okay, interesting.
This is in an agile situation, throwing sticky notes up against the wall. Just get them on the wall. We'll observe later. Because if I pause every time somebody says something in a game of charades, I'm like, what do you really mean by that? What we're trying to do in like the UDP protocol is get as many pieces of information out as we can. But at the same time, why are there so many miscommunications?
Right. Yes.
And I think that it's like we're understanding the car, but we are not understanding the engine.
Mm.
And so if we start getting good at, you need both, because if you just have empathy but never say anything and never interact with anybody, that doesn't generate innovation.
I like the idea that here's what I thought you were going to say, and I'm glad you didn't go there. I thought you're like, oh, UDP, like that's broadcast. Don't do that. That's just like sending the memo, the corporate memo that says, come back to the office, do AI, do two people's jobs. Thanks, bye. Don't come to me. And this is not a dialogue. But also, where you took it was sometimes you need it to get the
Yeah.
ideas out. We're just like, and coming back to the conversations that you shared with me that you had with Scott, right? About like, let's communicate about like what protocol are we using? And I know that for a
Yeah.
lot of people that sounds very like wooden in a social context, but it's like, listen, is our goal to get a whole bunch of stickies on the board and then talk about it, or is our goal to put a
Yeah.
sticky on the board and talk about it, and make sure we're on the same page and have that
Exactly.
fidelity? Like, what fidelity are we going for? And that is something that then you can like it translates into more efficient communication. Like if you were to look at it from that
Hmm.
business lens, in a slightly more, I don't know, I guess data oriented way. I was going to say
Yeah.
sterile, but that's not quite what I mean. What I mean is like, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I going to invest in people having empathy and having an empathetic communication framework? Oh, because there will be fewer miscommunications. That's great because that happens all the time. We've just accepted that communication is imperfect, so we just bake it in. And now, okay, we can get more, we can have higher fidelity in our communications and we can be more efficient. And then there should be less communications. And where my head goes is like, okay, how do I measure that as a business?
Yeah.
How do I go, you know what? All that time we spent figuring out what our protocols are, what our infrastructure is, and it's an ongoing thing. It's not just a, start and finish and we're good. Like this is ongoing time we're investing. How do I know if it's paying off?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. Looking at two different things, lagging indicators and leading indicators.
Mhm,
Leading indicators are what we want. These are the levers that we can pull. So these are things like psychological safety.
mhm,
You might think it's woke. There's math that backs it up. Like when people and I think too, it's like let's take the virtue signaling out of it.
mhm,
Like what is it? Like Amy Edmondson coined the term in 1999, and it's that people in a group feel comfortable in a social setting speaking up without the fear of being seen as ignorant, irresponsible, shamed. So we need this, right? Especially to catch bugs or to say, oh, no, that's not that. But what if we did this to be
mhm.
able to build on each other's ideas? So it's things like that. So there are, leading indicators that, we can measure, like, do we have engagement? So one is how effective are meetings? We did this where it was like, so in the Agile Manifesto, the one principle that I'm like, not quite, is, it talks about communication. It says that face-to-face communication is always the best. It's not. That's okay. They're not communication experts. Get it. Stand-ups. How many people have been in like a stand-up or a sprint planning meeting that's supposed to last for 15 minutes and it consistently is an hour?
Mhm,
That's because it's a mismatch. A status update. So what we did was like, oh, this is a mismatch. So we're just going to post, we're going to have a Slack channel that says stand-ups and everybody's just going to post it asynchronously and
mhm,
say, here's what I'm working on. Tag somebody if you're blocked, read what people are doing. And then it takes everybody 5 minutes instead of 15. But then it's like, okay, save that for the prioritization meeting. Save that for the
mm.
retrospective, because that's where we want to, again, have that more, three-way handshake type of dialogue, especially in a retrospective. So, are your meetings running effectively as an example? Like, is there
Mhm.
spite on your team? Like, are people like
Ooh.
getting along? Like, oh, I could go into spite.
I've
There's a lot.
never
If
like
people,
that's fascinating.
yeah,
I love that.
it's incredibly contagious and one of the
Mhm.
biggest factors that will take down a team dynamic incredibly quickly,
I
exponentially quickly.
I believe that.
So there are like, metrics that we can do and levers that we can pull. It's
Mhm.
like how many miscommunications, like you can measure it
This is like
quantitatively
a
and
surveying kind
qualitatively.
of thing. Yeah,
You
okay,
can
got it,
do
yeah.
that. People tend to be a little burnt out on surveys, right?
Yes.
So, there are other ways to do that. But then there's also the lagging indicators, which is what's our throughput? Like, how
Mhm,
many new
mhm,
ideas are we coming up with?
hmm.
What's our retention rate? Are people quitting?
Interesting. Yes, fair.
Right? And so I think that the challenge is that pretty much any metric when it comes to organizational health,
Right.
I think
Yes.
could come back to empathy in some way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
So because it's so foundational, if we spend time optimizing that, I just feel like, it's a huge leverage point because we get exponential benefits from lower investment. Yeah, but it's like, but if we want to get those benefits, we have to be very clear about what it is. And instead of telling people, oh, have more empathy or doing the virtue signaling where it's like, I'm an empath and you're not. No, that actually makes things worse. Right. So getting really discreet and really technical around empathy, thinking about it as infrastructure, thinking about it as a communication system. Like this is just where the math and where the science points. So to me, I'm like, as just a fun, interesting rabbit warren that I want to keep exploring for the rest of my career. And yeah, I mean, when we do this, then we can do what humans do best. We can solve problems together. We can communicate effectively. We can create a sense of belonging and community, right? Which are things that we need to survive.
I love that. I, actually, I wonder if I can kind of bring you back because there is something you said. Well, there's several things you said that I know my listeners can relate to. Stand-ups and meetings that just aren't efficient or effective, miscommunications, spite on the team, morale, a lack of safety in the sense of being able to sort of voice concerns. If I was going to like take this practically, right, and if someone listening has a team where they're like, yes, there's a lot of spite on my team. Andrea, what do I do? What do they do? What are
Um,
some things they can do?
Run small experiments, right? So the reason that we like ended up doing the status meetings, right? And if you listen to all of the stories of breakthrough innovations and how we used empathy, the reason that we did that was because we paused and said, this thing isn't working.
Mhm.
So we observed something. What's going on here? And then it was like, what if we blah, blah, blah? So then it's like, well, okay, well, let's test that for a couple weeks. And there were plenty of things where it was like, whoa, that doesn't work at all. Right. So when you run a test, it's like keep it, modify it, or discard it. So the stand-ups one, it was like, okay, y'all, this is like annoying. Does anybody like, having a 15-minute meeting and then it constantly runs over an hour and we all feel like it's a waste of time? Raise your hand if that brings you joy. Right? Crickets. So it's like, okay, we're all unhappy. How do we make ourselves happy? So it's not going out and looking for this like perfect thing that somebody else has created because nobody
Right.
can create the perfect thing for your context
Mm.
in your present moment with your complexities and your team dynamics. And this is what empathy allows us to do. It allows us to collect data on different perspectives and then innovate and say, well, what if we did this? So the stand-ups one, it was like, well, what if we just posted it in a Slack meeting? I was like,
Mhm.
that sounds good. I could do that. We ran it and then we kept it for over a decade because it was like, this is great. Then we experimented and was like, well, what if we do this with the retrospectives? And I
Mhm.
was like, ooh, no, we're actually losing a lot of important information. Let's actually instead let's take the time that we were spending in the stand up and let's add that to the retrospective. So
Mm.
both meetings were like 30 minutes. So we deleted essentially the stand up meeting and then we extended the retrospective meeting. And like now, computationally, like we can understand
Right.
why.
It's like we needed a different protocol for this. Stand-ups is a different
Right.
protocol than retrospectives. We ran some experiments, and yes, this
Yeah.
is more
But that
effective.
was not because I went out and read, like, this is the perfect thing you should do. In
Right.
fact, all of the things that said you should do this said I shouldn't. And
Shouldn't
I
be
was like,
right.
I think you're wrong. So,
Hold my tea.
yeah. Yeah. Another thing to look for is how much slack and redundancy do you have in your system? Like, is your calendar so full that you have no time to just have these kind of, more spontaneous and asynchronous like sessions to dive into a problem, right? And there's some work here if people want to nerd out. Eleanor Ostrom
Hmm.
she's an economist. She did work on the tragedy of the commons. And so how do people best manage a fixed resource?
Hmm.
Right? So that they
Interesting.
don't all
Okay.
deplete it. So it's things like, okay, you've
Right.
got a bunch of fishermen, there's a limited amount of fish stock.
Right.
Like self-interest will kick in and
Right.
say, and then everybody loses because all the fish are gone, right?
Right.
So how do we coordinate our activities when everything's really high and we all have to sacrifice? So that's her thing.
That's fascinating.
So she came up with a bunch of different stuff. One of the most important things was the opportunity for chit chat.
Huh. Okay. You know, it's
So
I love that. Okay. Sorry, go on.
yeah, what this is hyper local
Mhm.
knowledge transfer and coordinating.
Ah.
So if I say that, then you're like, oh, yeah, that's really important. But if I
Yeah.
say you need
Chit
to have
chat.
time to let people chit chat, it's like,
It.
no, we need to get things done.
y-
We need to be productive here.
Yes,
Right.
but chit chat is productive. It is
Right.
coordinating.
Right.
Um,
It's not forced fun. It's not like you need to come to this team bowling thing.
that's
And
extra.
if
Yeah.
you don't eat the chicken fingers and have fun, then you are not
Yeah.
like part. It's not that. And you can do things as easy as like one of the policies that we ended up experimenting with, it worked really well, was we gave a 5-minute grace period to every internal meeting.
Yes. Okay. I see. For chit chat, or just we left it open.
Left it open.
Hmm.
If you need a bio break because
Mhm.
your last meeting ran over,
Hmm.
get yourself a cheese stick, like, use the loo, do what you need to do because, like, it's important. Like, you should be taking care of your body. We need healthy people to, like, create healthy systems. But most people showed up and it was like purpose was chit chat. And so a lot of people showed up, it's like it's unstructured, just and that was where a lot of exchange happened. It's like, "Hey, what are you working on?" It's like, "Oh, I'm doing this thing." "Oh, I actually did some research on that for my other client. I can
Yeah.
share what I learned." That's a hyper local thing because it's a highly specific problem. Those 2 people probably wouldn't have had the opportunity if we had only stuck to the agenda the entire time. And I'm not saying
Yes.
don't, but build these opportunities for effective Slack in your system and let the team experiment. You need
Yep.
a little bit of sense of autonomy. That's really healthy for a team too. That doesn't mean letting go of accountability, but create the culture of having these experiments. So that's what I dive into a lot in the remote teams course.
I love that. I think it. You know what I like about it is it sometimes just all comes back to something a lot more innate in our humanity than business stuff, right? We're like, oh, chit chat, that sounds unproductive. Guess what? We built our entire species on chit chat, like hyper localized coordination, cross training, information sharing. Not because it said so on the agenda. That's how we innovated. We're like, oh, you're working on that thing? That reminds me of this other thing that has nothing to do with that. Let's chit chat about that. And you're going to get an idea, maybe, that is going to take you further than we would if we followed the agenda and used the full 30 minutes for the meeting.
So here's another way to think about it. Humans aren't the only hypersocial species. It starts raining. Ants all send pheromones out. They send chemical signals from one ant to another,
Hmm.
and then the entire colony can relocate. But not necessarily from like the queen saying,
Hmm.
okay, I am going to dictate, I'm going to create a hierarchy. Here's the business plan. Here are all the KPIs. But it's like everybody interacts, like all the ants send chemical signals to the people, like to the other ants around them. This is what's called a complex dynamic adaptive system. So, again, term that you can go research, but there's interesting math behind it. Another example is bees. Bees go out, they're scouts, they look for flowers when they have like, whoa, y'all, there is this like amazing field over here, like we can get some pollen. They come back and then they do a dance. They wiggle their butts and
Right, right.
say, here, and there's different specific dances to say like what direction and how much and stuff. So ants send chemical signals, bees do a butt dance, humans use language and empathy. So it is that like mechanism, and this is where the system infrastructure comes in because we can then use those infrastructure patterns and knowledge to do that better because this is how we interact. This is how we transfer knowledge. And so if we do things like cut off chit chat completely, and I'm not saying the organization should be only chit chat. Nobody gets anything done that way. Like you,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's about having the right balance of all of these different
It's
things.
these
And
protocols, right?
mm-hmm,
That's what makes it infrastructure.
mm-hmm.
You know, it's interesting because it ties it all the way back to something you said at the beginning, right? This idea of self, this idea of community, and this the idea of otherness, right? If you don't think you're an ant, then you are not going to send the pheromones. If you don't think you're a bee, you're not going to wiggle your butt when you come back from a great flower, and
Yeah.
it's not going to benefit the whole.
Yeah. I think of this as like, this is not a term, at least that I have seen or researched, but I think of it in terms as we have miscommunication and we have discommunication.
Mm-hmm.
So we have like, okay, I attempted to interact with you, but it didn't quite go as we wanted to. Like the information wasn't exchanged effectively. That's a miscommunication. Discommunication is I am isolated and I'm not interacting with anyone.
Interesting.
That's how I think of it. And so we've got a lot of discommunication. These are echo chambers, right? These are like, social media algorithm islands, right? That we're getting split into.
Even,
Um,
the conference we were at, I noticed there was a
mhm.
movement of, "No, I'm not gonna be going to this conference because actually I'm better working in isolation." Like, I'd rather not sit and talk about values. I'd rather just get my work done thank you very much, bye. And it really got me. I've been thinking about that the whole time we've been talking because I'm like, yeah, I mean, we are social creatures. Not to say that people who prefer to be isolated are doing anything wrong, but it just the more we talk about it, the less sort of natural it seems. Um, we've evolved as social
Yeah,
creatures. It's a
yeah.
hard one for me. Anyhow.
Well, and it's difficult, like, if you don't have the right environmental factors and the right resources internally, like, if I can't regulate, if I'm so emotional about a particular policy or, injustice that I feel, or, if I feel like I've been wronged in some way, I'm naturally going to disconnect myself from people that I feel angry with. So it takes a lot of wherewithal. I think this is, sometimes empathy is described as a muscle. This is where it is, like going out and being like, I'm not comfortable talking to somebody who doesn't say yes all the time. Getting to your thing on AI, I
Oh
think
yes,
that
can we
might
go
be a
there?
good,
Yeah,
that might
actually,
be a good segue.
maybe let's round out there because AI is the big elephant in the room. I think some people
Yes.
would argue that AI means we don't need to focus as much on empathy and being social and humans.
Yeah.
And some might argue that actually all it brought us all to the same table, the menders, the makers, and everyone in between. Now feeling like we can collaborate, should collaborate, but not necessarily being on the same page yet. Um,
Yeah.
Tell me how empathy fits into the world of AI in your mind.
Yeah, so I think some of this is like I can't give answers that are as confident as I can with others because this is just a very new field. And
Mhm,
so,
mhm.
you know, a huge caveat, these are my instincts, not like facts,
Fair.
right? So take everything I say here with a grain of salt. This is my futurist, best knowledge self. I think like there are fields like artificial empathy that like we're trying to train models to be more empathic. The challenge there, I think, is again understanding what is empathy and what looks like an empathic response. Because in AI, what sometimes looks like an empathic response, the technical term for it in the field is sycophancy. So AI is acting like a sycophant and just
Mhm,
saying everything you want it to say. And then
mhm.
you're like, oh my God, I'm this brilliant person
Right.
in the world, thank you. Like, and it's even hard to temper it down. Like I've got process files and stuff where I'm like, do not tell me that I'm amazing. Like just give, and even that, it's like it's hard. And a lot of that I think is because we're trained. Like my hypothesis, there was a great article in the New York Times today about prompts. There was one study that was cited. It was from a team that studies like harm that comes from
Okay.
AI. And so again, lagging indicator. So what they found was that the people who are building the models, they want it to be, truthful, honest, and doesn't cause harm. I don't know if I got all three absolutely accurate, but it's essentially that. Oh, helpful, that's what it is. Helpful, doesn't cause harm. And yeah. The challenge, like this is a programming human thing. The programmers who are creating these large models, they want to be helpful. They have really good intentions. So they're focusing on the helpful parts of the model first.
Mhm, mhm.
And so the earliest seeds of it are to train it to be helpful and then to be harmless and, later in the process. So it's kind of like QA. I mean, this is how we have developed software. And, like we want to make sure that the feature meets its requirements and then we'll check for bugs later down the line, right?
Mhm.
Very natural, right? And I don't think anybody would fault somebody. I think we would actually say, look at that really compassionate developer. Like they want to be helpful. They are putting in the work, right? But here's the problem. This research team found that like they had a chance to assess the helpful model before like the other aspects had
Mhm.
been added to it. It was 30% more likely to cause harm
Wow.
and to, like, lie or,
Huh.
be disingenuous, and that is incredibly problematic. So, I think, like, when we're talking about empathy in the age of AI, there's so much that goes into it because there are the humans who are creating the models. There is the training data that the models are used, they're being used. There is the policy and the governance and the regulations. There is the existential dread Or Utopia. So the same article, it cited like the two like most cited researchers like in AI. One of them is a total like we are all going to kill ourselves. The other is like, no, this is going to bring in the best era. So essentially, when
Mhm.
you're trying to predict, you're just playing a big game of Plinko when you've got such a big discrepancy. Like I have no idea where this is going to land, but I do know that to me, understanding the mechanisms that enable effective communication collaboration on a human level can't make things worse, I don't think.
Hmm.
So to me, I think that's the best defense that I have against trying to skew the system towards a more positive outcome. And if that's not clear, it's the like age of prosperity instead of we all kill ourselves.
Mhm. Right, right.
Um, yeah, so I think then if you understand empathy on a more technical level, if you because here's the other thing, a lot of it is counterintuitive,
Uh,
right? We follow the science, then we follow the science. But if we say, "Oh, no, 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 we need to have these people do this helpful thing first," what we're doing then is actually, like, doing something that is a vanity metric, and we're doing it because it feels good. It feels like we're putting people first, but we are actually causing systemic harm.
Interesting.
So
I like
that's
that.
where it's like, okay, having that
It's
cognitive empathy is important because we need to be able to evaluate, like, okay, how do
Mhm.
these measures work? And yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is that there has been so much around this stuff that has literally just like broken my brain in the best way. And I think that is kind of what we need a little bit right now. So yeah, if and the other thing I think that is really important is to remember that AI is a tool, not a teammate. It can talk to you and it, very clearly passes the Turing test. It like sounds like human, like, when I use it sometimes, like when I've trained a model to sound like me, it can write better than I can sometimes,
Mhm.
and I'm a
Mhm.
professional communicator and have written professionally for 25 years. Like, it's scary. How do we use that as a tool? Now it's like I'm using it to capture more nuance, and I'm actually, like, having more dialogue to refine my thinking rather than just, like, trying to focus at speed. So I'm actually using tools to go deeper and to help me think about this in a more skeptical way. I do tend
Mm.
to be a little bit more of a like I have an optimism bias. So by asking it like ask me critical questions to help me refine my thinking,
I like
changing
that.
the way I'm prompting it so then that way I'm focusing on depth more than just like generating a bunch of gibberish.
Speaking of AI as a tool, something you said to me as we were prepping for this, you said the purpose of AI is to help humans human better.
I did say that. Yeah, I think that that's the mission. I think and I think like for the developers who are, building these models, like, okay, I want to be helpful. Why do I want to be helpful? It's because I want humans to human better.
Mhm.
And
And
so on a team, like this can look like Genworth is, I'm in Richmond, Virginia. They're a company that specializes in insurance and stuff and finance. The CIO was on a panel. I really liked the way that, he shared things. He's like, AI is an empathy enabler because the worst thing we want to do is have a chat bot interact with somebody at like a major crisis in their life. That is the opposite of everything we stand for, and it's, like, organizationally, and I like, that's gonna lose us money. How can we use AI to eliminate the things that are getting in the way of having our agents be there and extend even more time and more compassion with each of our customers?
I love that,
I
and
think
that
that's a
translates
great
into
example.
teamwork as
Yep,
well.
that is a great example of using AI to help humans human better.
Yeah.
And so I think that where you can use this is AI very much as the Wild Wild West. A lot of it is like, oh, it's used for vibe coding, it's used for this and that. Where in your organization can you leverage this as a tool to help you run experiments or to help you brainstorm or to help you like, and so I think AI literacy in terms of like, what is it? And thinking about it as a tool and not, replacing an agent like as we're just gonna have an army of chatbots run our company. There are some use cases, I guess, where that can be the most efficient, but I would argue that most business models or organizations don't fall under that bucket. That's the way I think about it is the purpose of AI is to help humans human better. And the way that we do that isn't necessarily by following our instincts, like that can be a really good place to start, but it's by following the science around how do we effectively communicate with each other. And again, going that layer deeper, and that ends up becoming a question of how do we effectively empathize with each other.
I love that. It actually makes space for empathy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, empathy exists. It's like that's like saying make space for your heart beating. Like
Well, I mean, and that's the kind of the thing that, like, that is the sort of business argument, I guess, in a way, right?
it
It's like,
is
we didn't
actually.
have enough time for empathy,
Yep.
to have these conversations about values and the way we're communicating and whether we're communicating effectively, and yet
Yeah.
that is the equivalency of not leaving enough space for your heart to beat.
I would actually argue so now that made me think about you've got different functions like breathing, your respiratory system. It's both voluntary and involuntary. So the majority of the day I'm going around, I'm not thinking about like air going in and out of my nostrils, right? But when I sit down and I regulate like meditation, creating a condition where my heart rate is going to slow or going on a run, like knowing how to have these different physical systems and how to optimize those. I think there is then the case of like, no, you do need to make space to listen to your heartbeat and to regulate that. You do need to make space to listen to your breath and calm yourself down or get more air in or whatever it is. And so, empathy in a similar way, like we have it. It's a predictive tool. We're using it. We're using it in different ways. It gets expressed in different ways, but it's there. But are we taking the time to really observe it and to think about how we can do it better for our organizations or for whatever mission that we want to get a group of people together and achieve something?
I like it. It's fascinating. Andrea, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. It's been so much fun. I love the ideas you bring to the table. Andrea, where can people learn more about you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, andreagoulet.com. I've got a contact form on there. I call myself a communication systems architect. So I work with organizations to help humans human better so that they can achieve their business goals or organizational mission. And then I'm on LinkedIn, so you can follow me there. I've got a newsletter there as well.
Andrea, thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.